Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thanks so much for tuning back into the channel, and today what I'm going to be doing is a bit of a retrospective on the year 1984 in rock and metal music, similar to what I did with 1974 when I looked at albums turning 50 this year. Now we're going to be looking at albums turning 40 in 2024, and looking at the 40 best rock and metal albums from 1984. So, just like with the video from 74, not going to be ranking them in the traditional sense, because ranking 40 albums would just be really difficult. So what I'm going to be doing here is going in chronological order of release date instead, and then at the end of the video I'll give my top 10 favorites from this year. So with that in mind, let's get started with the month of January. Kicking things off here with Fistful of Metal by Anthrax, their debut record featuring Neil Turbin on lead vocals here. It's early thrash on display, young Anthrax, not bad by any means. You know, the classic era of the band really didn't start until Joey Belladonna joined for their next studio album, but still, really solid record here with some strong tracks like Death Rider, Metal Thrashing Mad, great Alice Cooper cover here of I'm 18, Soldiers of Metal, Death from Above, and Anthrax as well. All solid tracks here on this debut. 1984 by Van Halen, the final Van Halen studio album with David Lee Roth until A Different Kind of Truth from 2012. It's a very commercial sounding record here, probably best described as pop metal, but full of radio hits here and very strong guitar work by Eddie Van Halen on tracks like Jump, Panama, Top Jimmy, Girl Gone Bad, House of Pain. Also includes Hot for Teacher, one of my unpopular VH opinions. Not a big fan of that track, but otherwise, very strong album here, the last of the DLR era until 2012. How about Self-Titled by St. Vitus, their debut album here, released on Friday the 13th. It's considered to be one of the first ever doom metal albums to be released outside of Black Sabbath. The riffs by Dave Chandler are bone-crunching, and some standout tracks here include The Psychopath, Burial at Sea, and Zombie Hunger, which helped to establish St. Vitus as one of the big four of doom. Plus, not to mention here, Burial at Sea is, in my opinion, one of the best doom metal songs of all time. So this record is stacked, just a great debut album, and super important for doom metal as well. Defenders of the Faith by Judas Priest. This is Prime Priest on display. Perfect record here from top to bottom. You know, during this time period, Priest was rivaling Iron Maiden for the best metal band on the planet. You know, they were both firing on all cylinders at this point, and I'll talk a little bit more about what Maiden did this year as well. But on this record here, you have the great dual guitar work by K.K. Downey and Glenn Tipton. Fantastic vocals by Rob Halford as well. He sounds incredible on this record, especially on tracks like Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, The Sentinel, and Defenders of the Faith. Some heads are going to roll as well. Great stuff. Next up, Crusader by Saxon. You know, Saxon had somewhat taken a backseat to other new wave of British heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest by 1984, but we're still releasing really strong albums, including Crusader here. Maybe a bit commercial, but a definite improvement in my opinion from Power and Glory from 1983. Up next, Out of the Cellar by Ratt. You know, Ratt became instant commercial success here with Out of the Cellar, featuring the massive hit that was Round and Round. Awesome guitar work here on this album by Warren DeMartini, and unfortunately the band would never reach these heights again. The Works by Queen. You know, by 1984, Queen had really restored a heavier sound driven by Roger Taylor and Brian May on The Works after the synth-heavy Hot Space from 1982 to much better results. You know, The Works was the best Queen album in quite a while, with standout tracks like Radio Gaga, Man on the Prowl, and I Want to Break Free. Well, this next one's too good not to mention here. We have the soundtrack to the movie This Is Spinal Tap by Spinal Tap. Really funny movie, of course. The soundtrack is hysterical as well. I hear they're working on a sequel 40 years later to This Is Spinal Tap, which, if true, is awesome. Can't wait to see it. But yeah, 40 years of Spinal Tap in 2024. Rising Force by Yngwie Malmsteen. Incredible shredding on display here by Yngwie on his first studio album that marks great strides for neoclassical metal. Of course, Black Star and Far Beyond the Sun are total shred classics and remain some of his best known material to this day. About Face by David Gilmour, his second studio album here. Really fun listen from top to bottom. You know, in 1984, both David Gilmour and Roger Waters released solo albums, and Gilmour's is a well-crafted, sophisticated record with great guitar work, of course. It's also produced by Bob Ezrin, this being the first time Gilmour had worked with Ezrin since The Wall. Pretty underrated record in my opinion, features some really strong instrumentation on display that I enjoy quite a bit. Love It First Sting by the Scorpions. You know, the Scorpions had been on an incredible run since the release of Love Drive here, and this album would go on to be their most successful in the US. It's a heavy, driving record from top to bottom with really memorable tracks on here like Bad Boys Running Wild, Rock You Like a Hurricane, Big City Nights, Coming Home. Crossfire, and of course, Still Loving You to close things out. One of the Scorpions' best-known albums and an iconic record for sure. Delving into progressive rock here for a little bit with King Crimson, we have Three of a Perfect Pair. It's the final King Crimson album to be released, featuring the quartet lineup of Robert Fripp, Adrian Belew, Tony Levin, and Bill Bruford, and also their final album until Thrack over a decade later. This album is a very unique record in terms of variety, as both sides of the album convey two different sides of the band, so it makes for a very interesting listen. Grace Under Pressure by Rush. Rush goes new wave here with Grace Under Pressure in '84. Definitely a change for the band as they adopt a bit more of a synthesizer-heavy sound, but it's still a mature, fleshed-out record by the band. That's a great showcase for Neil Peart's drumming, and of course the tour for this album was fantastic as well. The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking by Roger Waters. Really underrated Roger solo album here, and I enjoyed just about all of Roger's solo material, not including the Dark Side of the Moon Redux, and I think the concept here is really interesting, very cool idea, and interestingly enough, this was pitched instead of The Wall back in the late 70s here, so it would have been interesting to see how the history of Pink Floyd would have been different had they opted to go with Pros and Cons instead of The Wall back in 1979, but I guess we'll never know. Still, fantastic solo work here by Roger Waters following his departure from Pink Floyd. Stay Hungry by Twisted Sister. Twisted Sister's monster commercial breakthrough here with hits like I Wanna Rock, We're Not Gonna Take It, and The Price. This is definitely one of the 80s most defining metal records, and it really put the band on top of the world for a little bit as well. Every song on here is a banger, although, I'm not sure if that's strong as You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. However, I don't think Twisted Sister made a bad album up until Lovers or Suckers, so this is definitely an iconic record here. Great cover art as well with D up on the cover. Awesome stuff here by the band, and like I said, their commercial breakthrough. Last in Line by Dio, his sophomore studio album here. The original Dio solo lineup was, incredible, and I'm honestly not sure which album is better between this one and Holy Diver. Last in Line is essential Dio with some killer guitar work by Vivian Campbell, and of course, awesome vocals by Ronnie. Moving on to my favorite Metallica album of all time here with Ride the Lightning. This is a flawless record from top to bottom, and one of the greatest metal sophomore releases ever as far as I'm concerned. This is young Metallica, full of creativity, showing off incredible strides in growth here from Kill 'Em All, which was released just a year earlier. Condition Critical by Quiet Riot. They essentially made the same album as Metal Health, although it was not as big of a commercial success. This album proved from a musical standpoint that they were more than just a one-album wonder, in my opinion. It's a fun listen, and while it's very 80s, I think some of the material on here still holds up very well. VOA by Sammy Hagar was his final solo album until 1987's I Never Said Goodbye, as he would soon join Van Halen for the release of 5150 in 1986, but this album here is a great mix of glam and hard rock, featuring, of course, his biggest solo hit, I Can't Drive 55. Haunting the Chapel by Slayer. This is a classic Slayer EP here. It's the follow-up to Show No Mercy, clocking in at only 13 minutes long. It's a relentless, thrashy display here by young Slayer on tracks like Captor of Sin, Chemical Warfare, and Haunting the Chapel. Final release here to talk about from the month of August, we have WASP and their debut record, self-titled. WASP burst onto the scene here in '84 with this incredible debut. It's full of classic WASP material and live staples such as I Wanna Be Somebody, Love Machine, Hellion, Sleeping in the Fire, and On Your Knees. A very fun listen here from one of my favorite bands of all time. Into the month of September here with Powerslave, an album that really needs no introduction by Iron Maiden. It's the top 3 Maiden album of all time. It's, one of Maiden's creative peaks. The guitar duo of Adrian Smith and Dave Murray are absolutely on fire here, with awesome vocals by Bruce Dickinson, and of course Iron Maiden's trademark bass-driven approach by Steve Harris is really prominent here as well. A great album, groundbreaking in a sense as well. So looking at the track listing here, Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Flash the Blade, Back in the Village, Powerslave, and the 13-minute epic Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner to close things out is just all top-shelf Maiden. We have the debut of Armored Saint, that being March of the Saint here, an album that put the band into debt for the rest of their careers, but it's still a very strong record here from top to bottom with awesome tracks like Can You Deliver, Madhouse, Glory Hunter, and March of the Saint, the title track. Of course, the one detractor, the production is poor, but I still think it's a strong record here by a very underrated band, and the music speaks for itself, and of course, because of the production, comes off much better in a live setting. Don't Break the Oath by Mercyful Fate, their iconic sophomore album, which is a bit more progressive than their debut, characterized by great guitar work from Sherman and Denner, and of course, awesome falsetto vocals by King Diamond. This album would also go on to influence the future of black metal and the rest of extreme metal in a major way. Next, we have The Warning by Queensryche. After their self-titled EP, Queensryche released their first full-length studio album in 1984. the warning is, early Queensryche starting to really find their sound with powerful vocals by Jeff Tate, really coming into his own as a vocalist, and great writing by Chris DeGarmo as well. Take Hold of the Flame is incredible, probably a top 5 Queensryche song for me that really helps to define this album and what that early Queensryche sound was all about. Tooth and Nail by Dokken, classic Dokken album of course, but in my opinion Dokken were head and shoulders above a lot of those 80s hair metal bands, due in part to George Lynch's incredible guitar playing on albums like this one. Of course, also you have Don Dokken on lead vocals, who sounded fantastic here. Nowadays, his voice is not nearly what it used to be, but it was still in top shape in 1984 for Tooth and Nail. The follow-up to Lick It Up, the now unmasked Kiss, would take a more glam metal direction here for the release of Animalize. This album features a lot of overlooked tracks, in my opinion, like I've Had Enough, Into the Fire, Get All You Can Take, Lonely as the Hunter, Under the Gun, Where the City Sleeps, Murder in High Heels to close things out is a wickedly underrated Gene Simmons track, and in my opinion, this is Paul Stanley's best vocal performance on a Kiss album. Maybe that has something to do with Paul Stanley producing this record, but he sounds absolutely fantastic, screaming on, a lot of these songs here, so for my money, he sounds better than ever on this record, and it's very overlooked, a lot of really underrated material here as well. Up next, how about Tonight by David Bowie, the follow-up to Let's Dance from 1983. This is definitely not top shelf Bowie, but definitely an underrated album, which is surprising considering he followed a very similar approach on this album that he did for Let's Dance, which was a much bigger success for him. Nonetheless, here is still a very fun listen with tracks like Blue Jean, Loving the Alien, and his collaboration with Tina Turner on the title track. Sign In Please by Autograph, probably best known for their only radio hit, Turn Up the Radio, super anthemic track, but there's some other really solid material in here, some great deeper tracks. It also includes some awesome playing by Steve Lynch on guitar, very underrated and overlooked guitarist. So, in terms of Autograph, they're a band that really never got a lot of radio attention outside of Turn Up the Radio, but still a very strong band nonetheless, and Sign In Please has its moments outside of its best-known song. We have Self-Titled by Bathory, their debut album here, which is super important for being one of the first ever black metal albums. The band burst onto the scene here with an abrasive, bruising record, and of course, over the years, Bathory have done better, but this is a great start and very influential album to boot. Southern Stars by Rose Tattoo. Rose Tattoo are a highly underappreciated band from Australia, but amongst their fan base, this album is very underrated. If you've not heard of Rose Tattoo, they're very much in the same vein as ACDC, and this album is full of deep cuts like the title track, and tracks like Let Us Live and Death or Glory. Switching gears now to Manowar with Sign of the Hammer. This is an over-the-top record for sure, as is most of the stuff that Manowar has put out, but it's 40 minutes of pure power metal aggression, and a lot of fun to listen to as well. Great vocals on here by Eric Adams, very underrated vocalist, and some standouts here include All Men Play on 10, Animals, Thor, The Powerhead, Mountains, and the title track, Sign of the Hammer. 74 Jailbreak by ACDC. Great EP here consisting of tracks that had previously only been released in Australia, finally getting an international release here. It's a great collection of deep cuts released here in 84, 4 years after the passing of Bon Scott. Next is Perfect Strangers by Deep Purple, reunion of the Mark II lineup here of the band. This is a great adaptation of the Deep Purple sound, moving into the 80s now. This is the first album from the Mark II lineup in about a decade here, so a bit of a marquee release in the Deep Purple catalog. Definitely one of rock and metal's finest reunion albums here by the band. Produced by Roger Glover and Deep Purple. We have Knocking at Your Back Door, Under the Gun, Nobody's Home, Mean Streak, Perfect Strangers, Wasted Sunsets, and Hungry Days. All standout tracks here in my opinion. Great stuff by the reunited Mark II lineup, and it's just a shame that the goodwill within the Mark II lineup couldn't have lasted a little bit longer. No Remorse by Motorhead. Great compilation here by Motorhead featuring 4 new tracks, including the iconic Killed by Death. The album's new material is also the first to be released under the new lineup of Lemmy, Phil Campbell, Wurzel, and Pete Gill. Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost. Originally released as an EP in Europe, the addition of 2 tracks made it a full-length album for its American release. It's considered by the band to be their proper debut album and had a massive influence on the developing extreme metal scene, so super important and marquee release here in the world of extreme metal with Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost, their debut. Next up is one of those albums where at least 50% of it is still played on classic rock radio. That's Reckless by Bryan Adams, an immense success for Adams, who scored big hits with tracks like Run to You, Summer of '69, Somebody, Heaven, and more. Live Undead by Slayer. Great live album here, even though there is some debate whether or not it was really live. Still a great showcase for the band and their early material here. Early Slayer were a force to be reckoned with, and this is a fantastic somewhat live record, whatever you want to call it. Still a great release by the band here, still in their infancy, still kind of young, still with their best work ahead of them, but doing some awesome stuff in the early years of thrash. thrash. Moving into the month of December now, I have two more left. We have Metal Church and their self-titled debut. They're a band that I always thought should have been bigger and more successful, and their self-titled debut is one of their best studio efforts as far as I'm concerned. It's a super heavy mix of, thrash and speed metal. It's a high-octane debut by the band, who would remain underrated, unfortunately, for the rest of their careers. Last one now to close out the top 40. We have Agent Provocateur by Foreigner, a very commercial-sounding record for Foreigner for their 5th studio album. It topped charts in the UK and reached number 5 in the US, and is probably best known for the hit I Want to Know What Love Is, but features some really underrated material outside of that on an album that got an unfairly mixed reception, I think, upon its debut. There it is, a look back at 40 rock and metal albums turning 40 in 2024. To count down my top 10 favorites from 1984, and I have to go at number 10 with Tooth and Nail by Dokken, number 9, Saint Vitus by Saint Vitus, number 8, Animalize by Kiss, number 7, Stay Hungry by Twisted Sister, number 6, Defenders of the Faith by Judas Priest, number 5, Perfect Strangers by Deep Purple, number 4, The Last in Line by Dio, number 3, Self-Titled by Wasp, their debut, number 2, Ride the Lightning by Metallica, and number 1 has to be Powerslave by Iron Maiden, my favorite band of all time. So that wraps up this video here, taking a look at 40 rock and metal albums turning 40 in 2024, celebrating their 40th anniversary. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you never miss a new upload. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming to the channel in 2024 that I'm pretty psyched for. And also be sure to go ahead and check out the video I did taking a look at 50 rock and metal albums turning 50 in 2024, a bit of a retrospective on 1974 in rock and metal music, very similar to this video here, which if you did not check out, please go ahead and check it out. I'll leave it linked in the comments section. And also, please let me know down in the comments your thoughts on my picks here, my top 10 favorites, as well as the entire list of 40 here. What are some of your favorite rock and metal releases of 1984? I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.